pare them down and let's look at 10 specific disconnect patterns. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of rest of this session. We're just going to look at each specific example, and we'll go from something very simple to may not be all that simple, but at each step of the way, I think you will realize that the solution that I'm talking about is not a rocket science. It is not something that you did not know already. But, let me put it this way. When things went wrong, remember the customer loss and everything, no one was ready to point the difficulty all the way back to these disconnect patterns. In other words, what I'm saying is that if in any company, if you see a majority of such disconnect patterns, now after this meeting, you will start to become a little bit more sensitive to these, right? Then you will know what kind of a company culture it is, right? And then if you, on the other hand, if you see that people are talking about this, may not be using disconnect patterns, but talking about the management challenges and such, as you walk into the company, then you should feel a little bit encouraged that, okay, they know what are the issues and they're trying to get in front of them. That is the goal here, main message. So let's look at number one. The way to interpret this is, everything on this side is kind of like what I'm suggesting, what you should do. Very simply, like I said, very first thing that will happen is this, and I've experienced this many times, is there is a perception, unless you do something about it, there is perception in China groups that very often, may not be all the time, but very often the U.S. manager kind of sort of talks down to the China manager. Now this may not be by design, this may not be by, because they don't care, but it just so happens that when you are discussing, when you're in a group meeting, things sort of start to snowball, and then you start to get into this type of situation. And most often, the way this happens is, some of the US guys or men and women, they sit around and they go on a conference call, and typically what they do is they experience a lot of quietness on the other side. That gets in the wrong side of the US people for various reasons, either because of their own habitual limitations, their own cultural limitations, or whichever it is, right? And we're not going to ask why, the cultural and all that. We're not going to look back and look at that. We're going to look at how we can solve it by a few simple tactical steps. And like I said, this is very simpler approach to this particular disconnect. And one thing is, there's a career opportunity to improve the skill. Anytime you talk to a China manager, if you're a US manager and you talk to a China manager, you want to always encourage him or her to make sure that their preferences are clearly heard up front, or even during the meeting. Give them time to talk. And maybe they don't immediately jump in and then say, look, they may not be the first ones to talk. But you want to be sensitive to this part and not take the silence as a license for you to sort of go over and run the meeting roughshod. That's not what I think the point here is that there's a lot you can do, but then main responsibility really comes down on the China manager. But here's the thing though, now you know it, so instead of being a victim of such a phenomenon, you want to just proactively, speak a few words that we expect. Let's take the turns, China team and US team, to lay out what the preferences are. Very few tactical slips like this will encourage and get the meeting to a different positive tone. And the second one is, this is also one other phenomena we hear all the time is, U.S. and China teams, we both work very hard. But you know what? Nobody appreciates the China team. It's almost as if, we take them for granted. There is a lot of that going on in companies where they think that China does the manufacturing, and so people's effort are not really all that contributing to the product success and so forth. But in general, it comes down to your IP company, even if your IP company, chip company, software company, and so forth. You want to make sure that you give at least one or two simple tips to your China manager, how you should get over it. Again, there's no point in talking big strategy and so forth. Very simply, I will ask you one question. I'm not sure if your experience crosses this or not, but at least in mine, anytime I see a report by a China manager, there's almost no mention of how individuals have contributed. Whereas when I write a report, or when my managers or people here, they talk about, he or she did a great job, that was difficult, but then they did this. So there's a little bit of a human element attached to it. And so one way you want to steer the China teams, when you're in that position, is to try and encourage that aspect of it. Of course, there's a little bit of a discomfort on the China side because they don't want to highlight their own individual thing. They want to be more of a harmony with the group and such. But it is not such a barrier for them to, for you to encourage and for them to take that. And so one other important, other more specific things U.S. always complains and always notices and suffers from is this. Many times China office folks, they say, we're not manufacturing center people anymore. We want to do real design. We want to do high-end design. We have the creative capability. We want to do all of that, right? But at the end of the day, almost, at least you will run into this at least once or twice. There is a very dangerous leaking of confidential documents that happen from China office. Now, this could be traced to a process. This could be traced to not being aware of what is right and what is wrong. And so US people generally get very wary and very discouraged. You want to do high-end product design, well, but I don't see that you are able to protect this IP, if we make you part of this discussion or a dialogue. And so there is a lot of that. And then mostly what I've also experienced is this. Whoever I talk to outside the company or around in the ecosystem, they'll say, well, what can you do? That's China. You have to get used to it and still do good in trying to get. Well, you know what? I think that, like what Jack Welch said some time ago, that you don't want to create a company where it absorbs all the ills of the local culture, but then you want to put the best of the company. And so what worked for us, as long as it worked, and is try to stop that. Don't accept that phenomenon. And very, there are tons of solutions, but I'm just saying that this is one way you can think about it, is you disseminate documents only in PDF. You make sure you're able to track them. You're sure you can watermark them in some ways. And we all have experienced different degrees of success with this. But having this enforcement, this policy enforcement will raise the awareness that, look, this is very important. Protecting the documents from leaking into a competitive field is very important, and that's the one way we can be a good competitive company. And these things, again, you should not let them go even if you see them as being a big cultural issue. It is not a cultural issue. It is just simply that you need to make them aware And it may happen even in U.S. I'm not saying it goes,
right.
This is not a one-way street. And in that case, even the China manager should have to put her foot down and then say, look, this can't be happening.
Right.
So there is that. Right?
Is there a service or a company that you guys use to make sure, and I know you told PF Watermark, but is there a particular service if something going through the U.S. Embassy exchange, or, that can, hey, we want to manage our documents a little better?
We tried that. We tried. There were a few software companies. Their service, what they said is, anytime anything goes out through company email system and such, it becomes encrypted, and then somebody needs to know the password or whatever. But to be honest with you, we didn't totally embrace that solution because it seemed too cost prohibitive, and it seemed to add another layer of hassle. We wanted a solution where this doesn't hurt sharing of the information too much. You're never going to get both them optimized, but frankly, I just don't know any simpler way other than to just simply eliminate the problem, by coaching and getting the people to understand, the reason why we do it. And then another common phenomenon we hear is this, that anytime we talk to China groups or China groups talk to U.S. groups, and they say, English, no problem, Avanti, no problem, right? And we can write English, and that's not a problem. Maybe spoken English, or it could be an issue. And I always say, you know what? If I know half the Chinese the way you know English, I would consider myself a lucky and fortunate person. So I will never say that you don't speak good English because I can't speak squat Chinese, right? But it comes down to the written English, the way you communicate. So one thing is that, yes, if you say that you can write English well, English is not a problem, then it does not reflect in the kind of documentation you get from China. It almost always results in a poor documentation. And I'm not talking about word formatting or anything, right? I'm just talking about how you organize information. When you're given a product spec or a product requirement or a brochure, you are looking for some ways to learn from how your China team has put together and such. And so what I thought, what I did when I was in the company, it helped a little bit, and is that in China, let's say you were in a China group and you just came back from customer. Your job is to write up customer meeting minutes. And you simply don't want to write, well, I discourage you from writing, okay, meeting started at this time, there were 5 6 people, and then he said, she said, and so on, and we concluded and we went back. I hope nobody writes that kind of meeting minutes. What we want is this, is what kind of a customer is this and why we should care about. Is this customer going to production in the next 6 months, or 1 year, or 2 years from now? And then what are the 1 or 2 main things that they are looking for when they agreed to meet us? And so there are a little bit of a strategic, how can we win this customer type of a twist to that meeting minutes is what you are looking for. And so what I think always helps is forget about your English language skills. Even if they are poor, they're not going to come in the way. I guarantee you. English language or not having good English language is never a problem.
Wait, what are you were saying when you're making that statement? I'm kind of confused on that. When you say I speak English, you don't know an English person going over there.
The Chinese person going over to the, visiting a customer in China.
Oh, okay.
Sales or marketing person. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Right. So remember we kind of model everything as a customer is there in China.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
But
so,
I just was saying thing about not speaking. I mean, cause I'm saying the same old thing. Well, what about my Chinese? Okay, if I'm going over there representing, trying to get with the manufacturers, I'm saying, so I'm taking this. I don't need to worry about how good my English is either. I need to focus on the steps. Is that
That has a different approach to it.
okay?
Different approach means